So I was really concerned that because I'm speaking in chapel, I wouldn't get to wear a costume for Halloween. But then they gave me this cool mic thing, so I think I got the Justin Bieber going, right? Like, really close, right? I don't know. Anyway, terrible joke. Sorry, had to start somehow. I've been asked to share a bit of how my faith and my work as an artist have informed and shaped one another. Or as I really like to talk about it, how God's reshaping me through my work, how art has helped me understand different things about God. Because if you didn't know, I'm an artist, I'm a designer, I work in those realms. I also work here and teach, many hats. But before we get too far, I feel always compelled to remind you of this. I am absolutely not perfect. I'm incredibly fallible. And so I'm going to do something that maybe is ill-advised for a chapel speaker, but I encourage you to question everything I say to you. Okay? Really, live in those questions. Artists actually love questions, so I feel like if you can just learn to live in the question and critically think about everything, you'll be that much closer to being an artist yourself. All right? So can we do that? Are we good with that? Cool? Great. All right. And there's one other thing that you really should know before I get too far into it. I don't make Christian art or Christian design. In fact, I really don't like that term as a whole. See, that term for me means one of two things. It either is ascribing a spiritual life to something that absolutely isn't alive, or it's a genre of work, and as such, it's usually a dated genre of work. And so unless these objects that I make as part of my work somehow have a spiritual life that I'm unaware of, I'm not going to call them Christian, all right? On the other hand, if it's a genre, and I must say that does feel like what we mean when we say Christian design or Christian art often, then I find that even more problematic. See, I don't think there's a particular style or a particular kind of content that makes a work of art or design inherently Christian. So why do we actually have a genre of Christian design or Christian art? I would argue it's because we want something safe. And by safe, what we mean is that we don't have to think too much about it or wonder whether it's good or not or wholesome or not. It's been, pre-screened for us. It's been filtered for us. It is absolutely safe. And I think that's a false virtue. What that safety actually means most of the time is separation. We find something that's not going to be too difficult to swallow. We find something that doesn't force us to ask questions. We don't have to worry about quality because it has a verse on it, or it's depicting a biblical scene, or it has, one of those phrases that makes things worshipful in it. I think we need to get out of this mindset of safety because it's not a biblical principle. In fact, it doesn't really jive that well with God's plan for us. I mean, when Christ impacts your life, he doesn't say, come and be safe. He bids you come and die. We forget that. If we look at account after account in the Bible, he sends people out to do impossible things. If anyone would come after me, he must take up his cross, deny himself daily, and follow me. This is not a call to safety. Following Christ is stepping out along a path that's lined with danger, distress, trouble, disorientation, alienation, and a new family. Our only real security is the knowledge that any and all sacrifice along the way is going to be worth it. That's our safety. And if we operate in a world that is inherently unsafe, how can we as Christians, as people who are making things, as artists operating as Christians, how can we actually engage the world if we're obsessed with safety? We can't. What safety does is it separates us from other people, often the ones that most need us. Unfortunately, this often works out well for us. That separation, when it works well, becomes privilege. It becomes something that we have that other people don't get to see or don't experience. That privilege breeds injustice in our culture. It might seem like a huge step to say that the way we engage culture leads to the injustice with which we treat other people. But art is often the first touch point we have with other cultures. We hear people's music. We see people's work. We see their clothing. We find the way they dress or speak or engage or share themselves, express themselves. The way we treat people's art becomes the way we treat those people. So if you wonder why the world is messed up, if you wonder why there's so much brokenness exhibited in culture, and there is, been in plenty of gallery shows to make that claim, it's because when it comes to culture, we've cultivated safety instead of engagement. We've endorsed separation instead of what I think we need, which is communion. Andy Crouch wrote a great book called Culture Making, Recovering Our Creative Calling. It talks about Christianity and the church and how they engage art and culture in the world. And it suggests that the problem that we have is our posture towards culture. And he says our posture, it's our general disposition. It's the place that we go back to feel comfort, all right? Our general disposition has been one of these things. We either condemn culture or we critique culture. They're all C's, so they're nice and easy to remember. Isn't it great? We consume culture or we copy culture. Think about that. Christians condemn, critique, consume, or copy culture. We condemn culture. We see something that makes us uncomfortable, we get our crosses out and start chasing out the vampires, right? We critique culture. Okay, we're a little more open-minded. We'll look at this stuff, we'll engage with it, but as long as we get that last say at the end of the day, we need to be in that position of power with it. We consume culture. That's even more problematic, isn't it? It's just like a TV show we watch. We're just going to take it in. You don't need to worry about that too much. Or we copy it. If you wonder why Christian art often seems like work that was popular a few years ago, if you ever wonder why the design for churches look like corporate design from 10, 20, 80 years ago sometimes, it's because of this last one. We look at culture, that worked nicely, let's just take that over here. And I'm telling you, if this is our posture towards culture, if those are the ways we respond, we've missed something so absolutely fundamentally important. We've missed the opportunity God's given us to create culture. We can condemn, critique, consume, and copy all we want. But if that's all we do, we've missed a great opportunity. And we need to create. In fact, our faith can help us make amazing things. Theology and sacred contemplation brings a whole slew of visual images to you, a whole visual language you can work with, a rich symbolic heritage you can borrow from things like baptism, from communion. God's many miracles worked out through the Bible are incredibly visual. Think of the ways God manifests in the world, visually shows himself. We have a rich visual language to draw from, and it demands that we create with it. And even more, I want to suggest that we have a biblical mandate to create, to be people making things. It continues that call that was placed on us in Genesis 1, to care for and craft the world, to participate in giving it shape and form, to order it, to give it names. That's something that becomes very apparent to me in works like Andy Goldsworthy's work, which quite literally deals with crafting and reshaping the world. And lest you think this idea of reshaping the world is just too grand of something for you to be involved in, I want to encourage you that we can do that in incredibly small ways. Tim Keller puts it this way: the material world was made by God to be developed, cultivated, and cared for in an endless number of ways. But even the simplest of these are important. He goes on to even say, without all of them, human life cannot flourish. Those tiny little insignificant things we do day to day add up to culture. Culture adds up to the world we are living in. Our little actions, our small disciplines that have their little piece in the world can make great change. You don't need to be Steve Jobs to go out there and reshape the world through design. I'll single out the designers in the room for a moment. You just need to make a single poster for an event. Because when that poster goes into the world, someone's going to encounter information that they never had before. If it's for an event, they're going to have to make a choice to either go to that event or not go to that event. If they choose to go to that event might shift their worldview. Their worldview is going to be shared with someone else, and it goes on and on and on. So that little tiny poster that you made, the skills and the events that you were putting to use could make an unimaginable impact. It might be one that we never even see with our own eyes. Small, intentional actions have huge impacts. It's one of the most basic principles of design. We call them Gestalt principles. Small pieces add up to a much more significant whole. That's why designers and artists obsess over detail. So I could say that that's really like the reason that I'm an artist. I'm moving in Christian circles because I want to be part of getting us back to creating culture, helping us recover that Genesis call, and that's part of it. But it wouldn't be fully true. It'd be like a partial truth. And I've been told that you're not really supposed to lie when you're here. So I'll try not to. But because the reason I became an artist is a lot simpler than that. I want to pull back to that passage that Christian read for us earlier. John 9, 1 through 11. This passage means a lot to me. First of all, do you guys notice how gross that was? I mean, this guy who's blind, his life has frankly been challenging enough already. He's brought before Jesus in a rather embarrassing way. The people ask, was it his sin or his parents' sin that made him this way? I mean, it's a horrible way to introduce someone. And what does Jesus do? He spits on the ground, makes mud, and rubs it in his eyes. It's disgusting. Sometimes I think we forget about that. I mean, I don't know that we really have a handle on how disgusting that is. So I brought some dirt with me. 1 second, let me just get this saliva going. I need a volunteer. Yerim, you're so brave. No, I don't. Good job. Awesome. Bravest soul in the room. Good job. No, it's absolutely disgusting. I'm not going to do it because I'd probably lose my job the next day, okay? It's absolutely disgusting. And here's the thing. We often miss that God frequently, I would even say persistently, uses base physical materials to manifest his glory. Sometimes God works with beauty. Sometimes in very disgusting ways. So let me reiterate what I was saying before. We need to not be safe. Because then we, like many others throughout the Bible and since the Bible, we're going to miss one of the ways that God speaks to us through these base physical materials. But that mud, that means something more to me. Because to me, when I read that, I identify with the blind person. See, I went through life not having much of a clue how to see the world around me. And I really couldn't figure out how to share my mind or my heart with other people. And I could see, but I had a hard time making sense of what I saw. I wasn't really sure how to communicate. For me, art is the mud that God rubbed in my eyes that helped me see. Art's the mud that helped me understand the world around me. So if it comes down to it, the reason that I'm really uneasy about the term Christian design or Christian art, it's that to me, faith is so much more fundamental than that. What makes me a Christian is not my design work. It doesn't make me a Christian. What makes me a Christian is what God has done for me, how he's shaped me and molded me, how he's given me a lens to understand the world I'm in. It's more meaningful than my work or my discipline. It goes beyond that. In fact, it's before that. I'm an artist because that's how God shaped me. When I have my priorities straight, everything I do as an artist starts from that point. That's how I experience joy. When I recognize that God made me into the person that I am, shaped my vision, then God becomes the inspiration for my work. He also often becomes the critic of my work, the one who helps me discern whether the work I'm doing is worthwhile. And in fact, God has just used art throughout my life to lead me around the world, into and out of other people's lives. He's truly used it to shape me and shape my relationships. I was just some kid in the Midwest, in a small town. I went to a high school. I had one art class, and it was photography, and I was terrible. I went to college planning to be a biology major. That's where the transformation happened. That's where I encountered my relationship with art, the way God had made me, a way of addressing the world that made sense. Transformation started there. It took me to Los Angeles, led me to go to an art and design school where I met a bunch of people I would have never otherwise met, and I loved them. They were so diverse and so different from me, and yet they also helped me sharpen my thoughts, my ideas. God used art to place me there. Through that calling, he led me here to this college. In fact, the only reason that I'm actually here in chapel today is because of that gift. It's because of how God led me with it. I wouldn't be here with you guys without that. He's absolutely used it to shape my life. So I just want to share a handful of moments in my life where God has used literal works of art or design to teach me about myself, my faith, and to reveal ways that art helps express a vision of the world that's rooted in faith. Because to me, more than just leading me around the country and in and out of other people's lives, God has really used art to help me understand him and his plans. It was a single painting at a museum that led me to pursue art as my calling. It was actually this painting. An image really doesn't do it justice. It's so textural and rich. It's by Van Gogh. I had never seen a tree like this, but I really wanted to. Van Gogh made the world new. It was unbounded by decay. It was swirling in this holistic dance. And I realized as I was looking at it, this could be a way of saying that there's more to the world than just the normal look of things. There's something in play that's making it new, that's making it different. I mean, here before my eyes was a vision of the world made new, interpreted through someone's imagination. It's something that we talked about in church, the world made new. And it was just a series of words for me. And then I found this painting. I was like, oh my goodness, we can start to visualize how the world might change. And sure, we're not going to capture it perfectly, but to find ways to live in that moment, it was beautiful. God, time and time again, uses art to help me visualize things about my faith that I always assented to, but never felt. I experienced a similar feeling when I came across a work of commercial design. And don't worry, that's not the end. This is a group called Macmillan Cancer Relief. They're based in the UK. They deal with people who have members of their family that are at terminal stages of cancer. They show up at your door at the end of someone's life. For this reason, they had the reputation of being angels of death in the world. A terrible reputation. Because of that, they contacted a design group to redesign their identity. They came up with this. A visual message of life. I mean, it's hard to see anything in that type, but joy or life or childlike experience, right? It's not about death anymore. Designers literally went into this space and took a message of brokenness and pain and began to convert it into a message about life. And I realized that design could be used to reshape people's experiences, to reshape communities, to take messages about death and start moving them to messages about life. I thought, man, we need to be engaged with this. Artists are out there doing stuff that feels in line with what our calling is in this world. But art does more than that. And more than just thinking about reflecting on communities and how they can be changed. Art also affects me on a personal level. I came across this sculpture. It's in Berlin. It's a memorial to the victims of tyranny and war. It's a pietà piece. It's a mother with her dead child in her arms in a room that's lit by one single light above from the sky. When you walk into that room, you become extremely aware of your presence in that space. You get to know your thoughts really well because you can walk in there with this piece. A man named Dan Seidel described this kind of experience as art diagnoses me. Art helps me understand myself and what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking and how I respond to the things that I encounter in the world, especially the difficulties I encounter in the world. By engaging with it, by entering the space with it, by being forced to reckon with it, we're forced to reflect on our own thoughts. We're forced to get to know ourselves a little bit better. Art diagnoses us. It can help us be more aware of the brokenness in our own lives and things that we need to address. I could go on like this for hours. I have moment after moment. God continuously does this to my life. But if I have just one more thing, because you guys are potential future church leaders, if you take nothing else away from today, I want you to take this next thing away. Because it's one of the core reasons Christians need to be engaged in art, design, and culture in general. Art helps us engage and discern beauty and wonder. And I don't mean the shallow definition of pretty or attractive or any of the terrible messages about bodily beauty that unfortunately designers have contributed to in our world. I mean genuine experiences of beauty. One of my favorite philosophers, Alexander Nehamas, describes beauty this way. Beauty is not the result of features of work that we already know. It's a guess, a suspicion, a dim awareness that there's more in the work that it would be valuable to learn. To find something beautiful is to believe that making it a larger part of our life is worthwhile. That our life will be better if we spend part of it with that work. Beauty doesn't accost us, beauty beckons. In our world of white walls, warehouse buildings, prepackaged box churches, worshipscape backgrounds, khaki pants, button-down shirts, one of the most neglected virtues is a mysterious and wonderful beauty. And beauty is part of God's nature. I would even dare to get just a little Platonic on you and suggest he's the definition of beauty. When we experience genuine beauty in the world, we experience a portion of something unimaginably more wonderful because we're experiencing a part of God's character. Beauty is rooted in him. We need to engage with cultivating beauty. But to make space for that beauty and wonder, we actually need to make space. There's little room for God's voice in a work that tells us what to think. We need work that provokes contemplation, reconsideration, works that we don't fully understand, that beckon us to come a little bit closer. Hopefully you're trying to figure out why in the world those words are on the screen and what they mean. That's a good place to be. We don't need a commercial jingle. We need the song of a generation. We don't need a giant cross in the middle of a painting to tell us what God's voice is. We need to pause. We need work that forces us to reflect and listen. We need to trust in the willingness of our viewers to examine their own spiritual conditions and leave the room and wander. We, in fact, really don't want to close off the message of an artwork because that will make it obvious. That leaves no room for the viewer to be part of the conversation by interpreting and reflecting. That leaves no space for other voices. So maybe what we need to do is get a little more okay with being abstract. Because art is better at provocation and reflection than at delivering a message. If you want to deliver a message, try an email. Art is better at wonder than at clarity. It's better when it forces you to stop and react than when it hammers you over the head with its message. I guess that's another thing that art has taught me. It's taught me how to become still. Because the most rewarding experiences of art and the most rewarding moments for my faith have been when I've been made to pause and reconsider. And let me leave you just one last thing. If we're Christians, if we want to make the claim that God inspires our work and what we do and everything we do, if we're going to claim that God has given us the gifts he's given us, then it's our obligation as an act of gratitude and worship to refine those gifts and use them. This applies to the details of what we do. Learning what tools are best for your work, that you might give him more glory. This applies to your projects that you engage in, delivering them well, and also selecting the kind of work you will engage in, so that you shape the world into one that reflects his glory. This applies to your very state of mind, that you're not focused on making yourself great, but making the best use of the gifts that God has given you. I hope while you're here, you find the mud that God wants to rub into your eyes that helps you see. Because I think that's why you came to school. I think that's why you came to this place. Seek it out, embrace it, develop it as an act of worship. Would you pray with me?